It was 2 a.m., and Elon Musk stood on the edge of a quiet Los Angeles street, staring at the dim glow of a Taco Bell sign in the distance. His usual life of private jets, billion-dollar companies, and endless media attention had become a blur of routine. What once thrilled him now felt empty. He was craving something different, something real. What would it be like to live without the weight of fame? Without the flashing cameras, the endless questions, and the constant pressure to be a genius? What if, for just a day, he could escape the Elon Musk persona and experience life as someone else? Someone invisible. That's when the idea hit him. What if I went undercover? Not as a journalist or a spy, but as a homeless person. He looked down at the worn jacket he had just put on, a jacket that barely resembled anything he would wear in public. It was oversized, fraying at the cuffs. His face was smeared with dirt, and his hair, usually perfectly styled, was now a messy, untamed mass. He had practiced the look for hours, applying a few layers of grime, perfecting his slumped posture. To anyone who didn't know him, he'd be just another forgotten face among the city's homeless. But here's the twist. He wasn't just any homeless person. He was Elon Musk. As absurd as it sounded, this was his mission tonight: to blend in, go unnoticed, and test the system, to see if anyone would treat him like a human being, or if he would just become another invisible figure in the urban jungle. A sense of thrill surged through him. This wasn't about playing a prank or gaining sympathy. This was an experiment, a way to peel back the layers of the world that had been carefully constructed around him, a way to see the truth about people's kindness or lack thereof when they thought no one was watching. He took a deep breath, adjusting the sunglasses that now hid his identity, and made his way toward the Taco Bell entrance. His heart raced, not from fear of being caught, but from the anticipation of what he might discover. What if the world saw him differently than he saw himself? As he stepped into the Taco Bell, the cold air of the night seemed to follow him inside, a stark contrast to the warmth of the bustling fast food restaurant. The buzz of the late-night crowd hummed in the background as Elon took a seat at the farthest corner of the room, doing his best to shrink into the shadows. Elon Musk didn't grow up in the lap of luxury, despite what many might assume. He was born in Pretoria, South Africa, to a Canadian mother and a South African father, both of whom were highly intelligent, but also incredibly distant. His childhood was marked by a sharp sense of isolation. While other kids were busy playing outside, Elon was devouring books on topics far beyond his years: science fiction, engineering, and technology. But the world outside didn't seem to care about his passion. His classmates made fun of him, calling him a nerd or a bookworm. He was often the target of bullying, which only added to his sense of loneliness. Elon found solace in his imagination. He would build intricate models and design video games, dreaming of a world where he could create things that would change the future. But even as a child, he felt the weight of being different, of standing apart from others in ways that were both comforting and isolating. His parents' divorce when he was just 10 years old only deepened the rift between him and the rest of the world. His father, a brilliant but emotionally distant man, pushed him to be exceptional, but it often felt like pressure rather than encouragement. His mother, while loving, was frequently absent, focusing on her career and personal challenges. By the time Elon was a teenager, he had grown accustomed to being underestimated. He knew he wasn't like the others, but he was okay with that. In fact, he thrived on it. Being the outsider gave him a sense of power, a freedom to pursue his passions without the expectations of those around him. When he moved to Canada at the age of 17, it was with the intention of eventually making his way to the United States and attending Stanford. He would go on to study economics and physics at the University of Pennsylvania, but by the time he was ready to dive deeper into academia, the world had already begun to take notice of his unconventional ideas. He dropped out of Stanford after just 2 days to start Zip2, a software company that would change the way newspapers operated online. It was the first of many risks Elon would take in his journey to success. Fast forward to today, and Elon Musk is a household name, synonymous with innovation. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and The Boring Company. Each of these companies represents a piece of Elon's larger-than-life vision for the future. But with success came a new set of problems. The more he achieved, the more disconnected he felt from the world he once yearned to be part of. The fame that once seemed like a distant dream had become a cage, a never-ending cycle of public appearances, Twitter controversies, and boardroom meetings. His every move was scrutinized, analyzed, and dissected. The questions never stopped. What's next, Elon? How do you keep innovating when you've already changed the world? There were moments, late at night, when he would stare out at the stars from his office or take a long drive in his Tesla, trying to feel connected to the world. But all he could think of was how much he missed the simplicity of his past. The days when he was just a kid with a dream and the world seemed full of possibility. The world that knew him as a visionary, an entrepreneur, but not as the person he truly was. And now, on this dark, cold night in Los Angeles, he was about to see how far he could go to experience life as a mere human. No Twitter followers, no billion-dollar deals, and no expectations. Just a man sitting in a Taco Bell, trying to blend in and perhaps, for the first time in years, feel like he truly belonged. Elon had always been someone who thought big. From the moment he built Zip2, to launching rockets into space and creating electric cars, his dreams had always been larger than life. But this was different. This wasn't a business venture or a technological breakthrough. This was something deeply personal. He sat in the driver's seat of his Tesla, staring at the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, he felt a strange unease. There was something almost reckless about what he was about to do. It wasn't like any of the risks he'd taken in business, where failure was just another stepping stone. No, this felt more vulnerable. But that was exactly what he wanted. In the mirror, he saw his reflection. The sleek, professional Elon Musk, the world-renowned entrepreneur who had changed the world and was on track to continue doing so. But that face, that image, no longer felt real. It was a mask, crafted for the public eye. A mask he had been wearing for so long that he no longer remembered the man underneath it. "I'm done with this," he muttered to himself. He had already spent the past few days planning his mission. It wasn't just about showing up at Taco Bell to see how they treated him. It was about seeing how the world would treat someone who had no power, no name, no status. Someone who was invisible. Someone ordinary. The plan was simple. Elon would disguise himself as a homeless man, unrecognizable to anyone who might know him. The goal wasn't to expose Taco Bell for anything. He had no intention of embarrassing them. Instead, he wanted to test the larger question. Do people treat the homeless with dignity, or do they simply ignore them? He'd seen it before, on street corners and alleyways, in the hidden corners of the city. People would pass by, eyes averted, as if the homeless were invisible. Even the best of people seemed to act as if they didn't exist. But Elon knew the truth. Everyone had a story. Everyone had a reason for where they were. And yet, society had made it so easy to forget them. He needed to know. Could he walk in their shoes for just one day and see if the world would change for him? Would the world treat him differently if they saw him as just another person? Someone with no wealth, no fame, no influence? Or would he discover something far more humbling? With that thought, Elon reached into the passenger seat beside him and grabbed the large duffel bag filled with his disguise. It was time to become someone else. He headed toward the apartment he had rented, a small, nondescript place away from his usual multimillion-dollar homes. He wasn't going to risk someone recognizing him, especially not in his own neighborhood. There, he had prepared the final touches for his transformation. A frayed hoodie, an old, oversized jacket, some battered sneakers, and a few dirt stains he had carefully applied to make the look complete. He took a deep breath. It was harder than he had expected. The idea of hiding who he was, of stepping into a world where he was no longer Elon Musk, was both exhilarating and frightening. But this, he realized, was exactly what he needed. A break from the fame. A break from being seen as a symbol. He had grown so used to the accolades, the attention, the constant praise. The more people saw him as the Musk brand, the more disconnected he felt from the reality of the everyday person. He didn't want to be a figure on a pedestal anymore. He wanted to see the world as it was, not as it was presented to him through the lens of fame. As he stepped out the door, he almost felt like a different person. Could this disguise really strip away his identity? Would anyone even recognize him for who he truly was, if he kept his mouth shut and stayed out of the spotlight? He locked the door behind him, the sound echoing down the empty hallway. Tonight, he wasn't Elon Musk, the billionaire. Tonight, he was just another guy trying to get by. And as he made his way toward the Taco Bell, he felt a strange sense of anticipation mixed with a touch of fear. Elon stood at the entrance of the Taco Bell, taking a deep breath. The neon lights above buzzed softly, casting a dull glow over the late-night crowd. It wasn't packed, but there were enough people in there to make him feel like a stranger. No one paid him any attention, which was exactly what he wanted. He adjusted his oversized hoodie, pulling it lower over his face, and shuffled inside with a slow, deliberate gait. His sneakers, scuffed from hours of wear, made a soft thud against the linoleum floor. The few patrons inside barely glanced up as he moved toward the counter, which was exactly what he had hoped for. If there was one thing he had learned about being homeless, especially in a city like Los Angeles, it was that people learned to ignore those who didn't matter in their world. A young woman stood behind the counter, her eyes flicking to him only for a moment before she turned back to the register. Elon could already sense the judgment in her eyes, the same kind of judgment he had seen before. She didn't know who he was just another person who didn't belong. "Can I help you?" she asked, barely masking the boredom in her voice. It wasn't rude, but it wasn't warm either. Just indifferent. Elon cleared his throat, keeping his voice low and rough, as if he hadn't spoken in days. "I'll take a burrito. Just the basic one. And a water, please." She didn't look up as she punched in the order. "That'll be $3.89, she said, her voice robotic. Elon reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled bill, which he placed on the counter. The woman didn't even make eye contact as she grabbed the money, counting it without acknowledgement. He watched her hands, moving mechanically, as if the whole transaction were an automatic process, a daily routine she had done 1,000 times. The lack of recognition stung, but he had expected it. No one ever expected much from the people who came in here in the middle of the night, especially not someone like him. He was just a guy who had fallen through the cracks, another face in the crowd. As he waited for his food, he observed the rest of the room. A few people sat at tables, their faces buried in their phones or staring off into space. One man, older than Elon, sat alone in the corner booth, looking down at the table as if lost in thought. He was unshaven, his clothes ragged, and his hands trembled slightly as he sipped from a paper cup. Elon couldn't help but wonder about his story. How had he ended up here? Was he just a victim of circumstance? Or had something deeper, something more tragic, brought him to this point? The woman at the counter handed him his burrito and water without saying a word, her eyes already moving to the next customer. Elon took the tray, silently thanking her, and walked to the farthest corner of the room, where he could sit in peace. He unwrapped the burrito, taking a bite. The food tasted bland, but it was filling, just what he needed. It was strange, though. He couldn't stop thinking about the man in the corner booth, the one who had been there when he arrived. There was something in his eyes, something that Elon had seen in the faces of the people who worked tirelessly to survive, yet never quite seemed to make it. He chewed slowly, reflecting on how the world had conditioned people to treat each other in such a cold, transactional way. The woman behind the counter hadn't cared to look him in the eye, to acknowledge him as a human being. But neither had the man in the corner, and neither had the few others scattered across the room. They were all there, existing in parallel lives, but none of them truly connected. Maybe that was the hardest part of being on the outside, being invisible. It wasn't just the physical act of being ignored, though. It was the sense of being irrelevant, the feeling that no one cared, not because they were mean-spirited, but because they had grown accustomed to people like him being part of the background noise. People who didn't matter. People who didn't count. Elon sat back in his seat, taking another bite of his burrito. His mind raced. What would the world be like if people truly saw each other? What if everyone saw the person behind the mask, behind the dirty clothes and the quiet demeanor? What if there were no invisible people, no others, just human beings trying to make it through the day? He didn't know the answer, but he was starting to realize that the question was bigger than anything he had ever worked on before. This wasn't about technology, space exploration, or electric cars. This was about humanity, about dignity, about how we treat each other when no one is looking. As Elon sat quietly, nibbling at his burrito and contemplating the disconnection he'd felt in the Taco Bell, the doors swung open again. A chill breeze swept through the room as a man walked in. He was middle-aged, wearing a faded denim jacket, and his hair was unkempt, but what stood out most was his eyes. They seemed to have seen too much, yet held an odd warmth beneath the weariness. He looked like someone who had experienced the rough edges of life, yet somehow hadn't completely given up. Elon watched as the man moved to the counter, his posture slouched but determined. The woman behind the counter didn't even glance up when he approached, and Elon's heart sank as he realized this man was about to experience the same indifference he had moments ago. Without a word, the man pulled a crumpled dollar bill from his pocket, placed it on the counter, and asked for a drink. No food, just a drink. The woman behind the counter took the money without hesitation, sliding the drink across to him without so much as a smile. Elon's gaze followed the man as he turned and slowly made his way to the back of the restaurant, where he found a small table near the corner. The man sat down and stared into the empty space before him, his hands wrapped tightly around the drink as if it were a lifeline. Elon was drawn to him, to the quiet solitude that seemed to hang around the man like a thick fog. The momentary feeling of disconnection from the world that Elon had been experiencing was now echoed in this stranger. There was something familiar about him, something that made Elon want to know more, to understand what had led this man here. Without thinking, Elon stood up from his table and walked over. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was a sense of solidarity, or maybe the lingering question of whether there was more to this life than success and status. Whatever it was, something in him urged him to reach out, to make a human connection. "Mind if I sit?" Elon asked, his voice still rough from his disguise. The man looked up, his tired eyes meeting Elon's for a brief moment before he nodded silently. He didn't seem surprised by the question, but rather resigned, as if he was used to people not talking to him unless they had to. Elon sat down across from him, the faint smell of the burrito still lingering on his hands. There was an awkward silence at first, both men simply observing each other in the muted light of the Taco Bell. Finally, the man spoke, his voice low but steady. "Don't see many people willing to talk to someone like me," he said, looking at Elon with a wry smile. Elon shifted uncomfortably. He had to remind himself to stay in character. "I guess I'm not like most people," he replied, offering a smile that felt strange on his face, but somehow genuine. "What's your name?" "John," the man replied after a pause, looking at Elon as though sizing him up. "And you? You don't look like someone who's usually around here." Elon hesitated for a moment. Should he tell him the truth? Should he say that he was, in fact, the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, someone who could fix any problem in the world with just a few clicks of a button? Or should he continue with the charade? He chose the latter, understanding that this moment, however fleeting, wasn't about his identity. It was about being seen as a person, not a brand, not an icon. "Name's Mike," Elon said simply, feeling the weight of the new persona. "I'm just passing through." "Yeah," John said, taking a long sip of his drink. "Where you headed?" "Nowhere really," Elon replied. "Just here, I guess." John chuckled softly, the sound rough and strained. "Sounds familiar. I've been stuck in nowhere for a while now." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The hum of the fluorescent lights above filled the silence. Elon felt an odd comfort in this shared space, in this unexpected exchange. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like he could relate to John's words in ways that were deeper than just a passing conversation. "What brought you here?" Elon asked, breaking the silence. John looked up at him, his eyes narrowing slightly. It wasn't suspicion, but something akin to caution. He set his drink down and leaned forward slightly. "You really want to know?" he asked, his voice softening. Elon nodded, intrigued. He had lived a life surrounded by extraordinary stories, space missions, groundbreaking inventions, high-stakes negotiations. But this felt different. This was real, raw, and something about it pulled at him in a way he hadn't expected. John took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. "I had a family once. A wife. Kids. Things were good. Then, life happened. Businesses failed. The house was taken. My wife couldn't handle it, and the kids, they grew up, moved on. I guess the hardest part was watching the people you love walk away when things go south, when they no longer recognize you. Elon listened intently, the words resonating deeply within him. Everyone had a story. The difference was, some people were lucky enough to keep their story going, while others were left behind. But was that really fair? Was life about success and failure, or was it more about the connections we make along the way? Sounds rough, Elon said quietly, knowing the words weren't enough, but feeling the need to say something. John nodded, a slight smile curling at the corner of his mouth. Yeah, but that's the thing, isn't it? It's easy to be successful when everything's going right. It's harder when you've lost it all. You don't see many people sticking around when things aren't going well. People just forget. Elon sat back, the weight of the conversation settling in. The truth was undeniable. John's life was a story of survival, of resilience, of trying to find meaning in a world that often overlooked the people who needed it most. As he sat there, feeling the hum of the Taco Bell's air conditioning and listening to the clink of trays and laughter from the other tables, Elon knew one thing for certain. He had made the right decision. It wasn't about the test he had come here for. It was about understanding something deeper. And maybe, just maybe, there was a way to make the world a little less invisible. The conversation with John lingered in Elon's mind long after he finished his burrito. The sound of the Taco Bell's kitchen humming, the muted chatter of late-night patrons, and the faint buzz of the neon lights seemed distant now, as if they were fading into the background. It wasn't the food or the atmosphere that mattered anymore. It was the weight of what John had shared. Elon had come here to test a theory, to understand what it was like to be invisible, to experience life from the other side of society's gaze. But what he didn't expect was how deeply John's story would resonate with him. As John finished his drink and pushed the empty cup aside, he glanced at Elon, his tired eyes still soft but filled with a quiet curiosity. So, what's your story, Mike? I'm sure you didn't just come in here to eat and chat with me. Elon's chest tightened for a moment. He'd been so focused on John, so caught up in this strange, raw connection, that he hadn't fully prepared for the question. He had spent most of his life being a man of many answers. Answers that made sense, answers that could propel him into the next big thing, the next big idea. But here, sitting across from a man who had lost everything, the usual narrative felt empty. What was his story? Who was he really? He took a slow breath, trying to gather his thoughts. I'm just a guy trying to figure things out, Elon said, keeping his voice steady. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was close enough. He wasn't lying, but he wasn't being entirely open either. This was, after all, a disguise. John nodded, accepting the answer without pressing further. Yeah, well, I get that. Life has a funny way of making us rethink everything. He shifted in his seat, his eyes flicking over to the counter where the young woman was now cleaning up. I guess we're all just trying to find a way to make sense of it all. Elon didn't know what to say to that. His mind was racing, but for the first time, the usual ideas and solutions seemed distant. For all the times he had been on the cutting edge of technology, leading revolutions in space, energy, and transportation, this moment felt more like the real frontier. The one that wasn't measured in miles or dollars, but in human connection. He reached for his water, taking a sip as he thought about what to say next. And then it hit him, the thing he hadn't expected, but had been missing all along. A moment of clarity. This wasn't just about understanding homelessness, or testing his hypothesis about how people treated those who were unseen. It wasn't just about empathy, or a social experiment. It was about confronting something larger. The human condition, the underlying truths about life that didn't come from a launch pad or an engineering blueprint. He put his cup down slowly, meeting John's gaze with a quiet intensity. You're right, he said, his voice soft but firm. Life does have a way of making us rethink things. He paused. But it's also about how we choose to see people, how we choose to treat each other. Maybe that's what really matters in the end. John's eyes softened as if he were seeing something in Elon that wasn't there before. He studied him for a long moment, and Elon could see the shift, the understanding. Yeah, John said finally, his voice filled with quiet conviction. People forget that. They get too caught up in their own stuff to see the people around them. But every person has a story, right? Every person is going through something. They're just trying to get by, same as the next guy. Elon nodded, his mind drifting back to his own life. The high-profile launches, the billions of dollars, the immense pressure to succeed, and the constant race against time. He'd never really thought about it like this before. He had always been so focused on pushing the boundaries of what was possible, but in doing so, he had neglected the people. The ones who weren't living in the headlines. The ones who couldn't even make it to the dinner table. Elon's heart thudded in his chest. What if he was wrong? What if the things he was pursuing were all just distractions from something more important? Thanks, Elon said, his voice quiet but sincere. For the conversation. For reminding me of something. John smiled faintly, the lines of his face softening for a moment. Anytime, Mike. I'm just a guy with a story. Just like everyone else. Elon stood up from the table, his body moving slowly, as if the weight of the moment was pressing down on him. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the crumpled bills he had kept for the past few days. He didn't count them, didn't hesitate. He placed a generous amount on the table, pushing it toward John. Take it, Elon said. For a better day. John looked down at the money for a moment, his eyes flicking between the bills and Elon. His expression was unreadable, but after a long pause, he nodded. I'll take it, he said quietly, his voice tinged with gratitude. As Elon walked out of the Taco Bell, the cool night air hit his face, and for a moment, he felt lighter. Not because of the money or the food, but because of the insight he had gained. He had come here to test a theory, but in the end, he had found something deeper. Something that couldn't be quantified or measured. It was a feeling, a truth, that resonated deep inside. Maybe the most important things in life weren't about innovation or success. Maybe it was about connecting with people. He walked into the night, the city lights twinkling ahead of him, but the question remained. What would he do with this new perspective? The crisp night air was a welcome change from the stuffy confines of the Taco Bell. Elon's steps were purposeful as he walked down the street, the city stretching out before him. He was used to running at full speed, always thinking ahead to the next venture, the next innovation, the next billion-dollar idea. But tonight, as he walked without a destination, he felt something different, a sense of uncertainty, of questioning. It wasn't just the conversation with John that had unsettled him. It was the realization that maybe he had been so focused on changing the world from the outside that he hadn't considered the deeper, quieter shifts that needed to happen within himself. For all his accomplishments, for all the accolades and the praise, there was a part of him that felt disconnected from the very world he was trying to save. He stopped at a street corner, staring at the glowing city lights as they flickered in the distance. His mind raced. What if everything he'd been doing, building rockets, electric cars, changing the face of space exploration, wasn't enough? What if it didn't really matter unless he could figure out how to connect with people? The thought was unsettling, yet somehow liberating. Elon wasn't a man known for his self-doubt, but tonight, there was no escaping the gnawing feeling that he had missed something fundamental, something that couldn't be solved by technology alone. He pulled out his phone and checked the time. It was late, and he still had the mask on. There were calls and meetings waiting for him back at the hotel, a full day of interviews and presentations lined up. But for the first time in a long time, the idea of diving back into work didn't excite him. He looked down the street. Maybe it was time for a change. As if on cue, a yellow cab pulled up to the curb. Without thinking, Elon opened the door and slid inside. He was used to luxury, to private jets and sleek cars, but tonight, something felt different about taking a cab. The simplicity of it, the anonymity it offered, felt right. Where to? The driver asked, his eyes meeting Elon's in the rearview mirror. Just drive, Elon said quietly, his mind still spinning. He didn't have a destination in mind, just a need to keep moving, to escape the pull of his thoughts for a little longer. The cab drove through the city, the lights flashing past like a blur. Elon felt a strange mix of calm and urgency. Calm in the sense that he didn't have to be anywhere, but urgent in the sense that there was something he needed to understand, something he needed to do. The driver didn't speak much, content to let the hum of the car fill the silence. For the next few miles, Elon stared out the window, watching the streets fade into the horizon. He was torn between his desire to return to his life as he knew it and the pull of this strange new perspective he was beginning to embrace. Finally, the cab came to a stop in front of a small park. The driver turned to Elon. "End of the line, buddy." Elon stared out the window at the park. It was empty now, the benches bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. A few joggers passed by, their figures casting long shadows across the pavement. It was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time that night, Elon felt like he could breathe. "Thanks," he said, handing the driver a few bills before stepping out of the cab. As the car drove off into the night, Elon stood there for a moment, staring at the park. It felt like a crossroads, a turning point, and he wasn't sure where it would lead. He walked into the park, the crunch of gravel beneath his feet the only sound in the stillness. His mind kept circling back to John's words. Everyone has a story. Everyone is going through something. It was simple, yet profound. What if there was more to life than just surviving, than just building and achieving? He sat down on one of the benches, looking up at the stars, the cool night air brushing against his face. As he sat there, lost in thought, something unexpected happened. He felt connected to the world around him, to the people he had met tonight, and even to himself. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the future. He wasn't thinking about the next big thing or the next big idea. He was just present. The quiet of the park allowed him to reflect on something he had never given much thought to, the simple human connection. It was easy to forget when you were caught up in the whirlwind of success, power, and influence. It was easy to think that everything revolved around innovation, that the only way to make a difference was by changing the world through technology. But in this moment, he realized the truth. It wasn't just about the technology. It was about the people. He stood up from the bench and took a deep breath, the weight of his thoughts grounding him. He didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. He couldn't continue down the same path without changing his approach. The next step, he realized, wasn't about business or inventions. It was about relationships, about understanding people, and about being willing to listen to their stories. As he turned and walked back toward the street, a sense of clarity washed over him. There would be more to do, more challenges to face, but for the first time, he felt like he was heading in the right direction. This wasn't just about testing a theory or living a grand adventure. It was about finding his own truth, and it was only just beginning. The next morning, Elon woke up to the familiar buzz of his phone, a constant reminder of the life he had carefully built for himself. But today, the alerts felt distant, as though they were coming from a world he no longer fully recognized. He had stayed up late the night before, mulling over the strange revelations that had emerged during his time at Taco Bell, and as much as he tried to brush them aside, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. After a quick breakfast, he slipped out of the hotel, eager for some time to clear his head. The city was waking up around him. Cars honking, people rushing to work, the familiar noise of a world in constant motion. Yet, there was an odd sense of calm in Elon's mind, a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was the result of spending the night in the park, or maybe it was because, for the first time, he had allowed himself to simply be present. Elon's thoughts were interrupted when his phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number flashed across the screen. "Mike, I've been thinking about what you said last night. I want to help." It took him a moment to process the message. It was from John, the homeless man from Taco Bell. Elon had not expected to hear from him again, especially not so soon. But there it was, an offer of help. He was intrigued, but also slightly confused. Help with what? Elon thought, staring at the screen. His curiosity got the better of him, and he quickly typed a response. "Help with what exactly, John?" The reply came quickly. "I know people. People who can show you the real side of this city. The part that most people never see. You said you wanted to understand. I can help with that." Elon sat back, the weight of the message settling on him. He had spent most of his life surrounded by wealth, privilege, and influence. But now, a man who had nothing was offering to show him the world from a completely different perspective. It felt like a strange reversal of roles. Why would John want to help me? Elon wondered. Was it out of gratitude for the money he had given him? Or was there something deeper at play here? Still, Elon couldn't shake the sense that this was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. It wasn't often that someone like him, with his resources and connections, was offered an unfiltered look at a world most people never experience. He quickly sent a reply. "All right, I'm listening. Let's meet." Elon arranged to meet John later that afternoon at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of the city. When he arrived, he was surprised to see John already sitting at a table, looking somewhat different than he had the night before. He was still wearing ragged clothes, but his demeanor was more confident, more composed. "Mike," John greeted him with a nod as Elon sat down across from him. "Thanks for agreeing to meet." Elon studied him for a moment, still trying to understand what had motivated John to reach out. "You said you wanted to help. What exactly do you mean?" John took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "I've lived on the streets for a long time. I know the ins and outs of this city in ways most people don't. I know where the resources are, who the people are, and what it really takes to survive in a world that ignores you. I've seen things that would make your hair stand on end, Mike." Elon's curiosity grew. He wasn't sure what he expected from John, but this wasn't it. The man before him wasn't a victim. He was a survivor, someone who had found a way to navigate a system that had written him off. It was a kind of strength Elon wasn't used to encountering in his world of high-stakes ventures and billion-dollar ideas. This was a different kind of intelligence, one born from the harshest of circumstances. "So, what do you want from me?" Elon asked bluntly. "Why are you offering to help?" John smiled, a faint, knowing grin. "It's not about what I want, Mike. It's about what you need. You want to understand this city, right? You want to understand people like me, who don't have the luxury of a comfortable life. People who have to fight for every scrap." Elon leaned back in his chair, considering his words. This wasn't just about helping him see the plight of the homeless. It was about understanding the complex web of social issues that kept people like John stuck in their positions. It was about confronting the hard truths that his wealth and success had often shielded him from. "I'm listening," Elon said, his voice low but intent. John's eyes sparkled with a quiet fire. "I'm going to show you things. I'll take you to places most people wouldn't dream of visiting. You'll meet people who've been abandoned, overlooked, and forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, you'll learn something that will change the way you see the world. Not just the city, but the people in it." Elon felt a ripple of excitement. He had been looking for something that would shift his perspective, that would give him the clarity he had been searching for. And maybe this was it. Maybe John was the ally he never knew he needed. "You think I'm ready for this?" Elon asked, raising an eyebrow. John's grin widened. "The question isn't whether you're ready. The question is, are you brave enough to face the truth?" Elon didn't hesitate. "I'm in." And just like that, his world was about to change again. The next few days passed in a blur of unfamiliar experiences. Elon was no longer the high-powered CEO with a private jet or a team of executives ready to carry out his every command. Instead, he was following John through the backstreets of the city, trying to absorb everything, trying to make sense of the world that had been hidden from him for so long. John's promise was no exaggeration. They visited shelters, parks, and alleyways where people who had been cast aside by society found refuge. Elon met the homeless, the broken, and the forgotten. He saw mothers cradling their children in cardboard boxes, young men staring blankly into the distance, their eyes hollow from years of hardship, and elderly women with tired eyes who had long ago given up on hope. Each encounter was a punch to the gut. Elon had heard about homelessness, read statistics, and even donated money to causes in the past. But this, it was real. These weren't numbers on a page. These were people. These were lives that had been disregarded. John showed him the places where the homeless went to hide from the authorities. He introduced him to people who lived in the shadows, people who had learned to survive by being invisible. Some had lost jobs, others had been victims of addiction, and some simply didn't have the safety net of a family or community to catch them when they fell. But all of them shared one thing. They were living in the margins, and no one noticed. Elon was struck by the contrast. He had spent years building innovations meant to propel humanity forward: electric cars, reusable rockets, AI-driven technologies, all aimed at improving lives. But now, in the midst of these dark streets, he realized that his greatest inventions meant little when the most basic human needs were not being met. At one point, as they walked through a small alleyway between two buildings, John turned to Elon. "You see that?" he said, pointing to a group of people huddled around a fire barrel. Elon nodded, the weight of the scene settling deep within him. "They're all people who had dreams once," John continued. "They had lives, aspirations, just like you. And now, they're here. You think they planned for this? You think anyone dreams of living like this?" Elon's stomach tightened. He had never really thought about it that way. He had always assumed that the poor or homeless had somehow gotten themselves into their situation, that it was the result of bad decisions or laziness. But now, as he saw the pain and the desperation in their eyes, he realized how wrong he had been. "I didn't know," Elon murmured, his voice trailing off. "That's the problem," John replied quietly. "No one knows. No one sees. They're invisible to the world, Mike. And the longer they're invisible, the harder it is for them to ever make it back out." The words hit Elon harder than he had expected. The realization that he had been blind to the true struggles of the people who lived on the fringes of society was humbling. He had thought of himself as someone who understood the world, who could fix problems with technology, with money, with innovation. But this wasn't a problem that could be solved with a new invention. This was about people, relationships, and a system that had failed them. For the first time, he began to question everything he had worked for. Was it really enough to build rockets to Mars while people here on Earth were suffering? Was it enough to make electric cars if they couldn't even solve the problems of basic survival for those who had nothing? They continued walking, and John led him to a small park where a group of men and women were sitting together, sharing what little food they had. Some were talking quietly, others were simply staring at the sky, lost in thought. "You see them?" John asked. "They're all here because they have nowhere else to go. And they stay because there's no one else who will listen. No one who cares enough to help. They don't want to be here. They want a chance. But they don't know where to start." Elon sat on a bench, his eyes scanning the group. For the first time, he wasn't just observing from a distance. He was feeling the weight of the situation, the hopelessness that clung to every face. "I don't know what to do," Elon admitted quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of frustration and sorrow. John gave him a knowing look. "It's not about knowing what to do right now. It's about understanding that there's a problem. You can't fix this by throwing money at it or building a new product. You need to understand what people need, not just what they want. And they need something more than just a handout. They need respect. They need a voice." Elon nodded, processing John's words. He had spent so much of his life focused on creating solutions, on finding ways to innovate and revolutionize. But this was different. It wasn't about creating something new. It was about addressing the pain that already existed, the pain that had been ignored for far too long. As they walked back to the main street, Elon's mind was racing. He had come into this journey with the idea that he was going to learn something new, something that would give him a fresh perspective. But what he was beginning to realize was that the answers weren't as simple as a breakthrough idea. They were about understanding the people he had been so quick to overlook. And for the first time, Elon Musk wasn't thinking about the next big idea. He was thinking about people, the ones who didn't have the luxury of living in a world where ideas and innovation were the answer to everything. He was thinking about the ones who needed something far more basic: dignity, respect, and a chance at a life that didn't have to be spent in the shadows. The following days blurred together as Elon found himself drawn deeper into the world he had never truly seen before. Despite the initial discomfort and the overwhelming sense of helplessness, there was a part of him that couldn't turn away. It was as if the city had cracked open a new world for him, one that had always been there but had remained hidden in plain sight. Each morning, he met John at a different spot: an abandoned building, a quiet corner of a park, or the shadowed side streets where the homeless made their temporary homes. John continued to show him the inner workings of the underworld, the invisible threads that held it all together. But what had started as a simple journey of observation had begun to transform into something far more personal. One afternoon, as they walked down a street lined with closed storefronts, John stopped abruptly in front of a small, unmarked door. It was a nondescript building, its facade weathered by time and neglect, but there was something about it that caught Elon's attention. "This is it," John said, motioning to the door. "You're about to see something that will change the way you think about this entire city." Elon's curiosity piqued. He had seen a lot, heard a lot, but something in John's tone made him realize he hadn't seen the full picture yet. Without another word, John pushed open the door, and they stepped inside. The building was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old wood and cigarette smoke. Elon squinted in the half-light, taking in his surroundings. It looked like an old warehouse, but there were no crates or machinery. Instead, the space was filled with rows of people, some sitting, others standing, talking in low voices. They were all different ages, different races, but there was one thing they all shared: a look of quiet desperation. "This is a safe space," John explained, his voice lowered. "A place where people can come when they have nowhere else to go. It's not perfect, but it's better than the street. Here, people can find some peace, some food, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to turn their lives around." Elon stepped deeper into the room, scanning the faces around him. There were no signs of luxury, no comfort to speak of. Just people, ordinary, broken, tired people. Some were talking quietly in groups, others sat alone in their thoughts. Elon was struck by the quiet resilience in their eyes. Despite the crushing weight of their circumstances, they were surviving. And in some strange way, that survival was a form of defiance against the system that had failed them. He was drawn to a man sitting by himself in the corner, his face gaunt and his clothes ragged. The man looked up as Elon approached, his eyes cautious but not hostile. "Hey there," Elon said softly, unsure of how to start the conversation. The man looked at him for a moment, sizing him up before answering. "You're not one of them, are you?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "One of who?" Elon replied, still uncertain. "The ones who come in, give some charity, then leave. Think it makes them feel good?" The man's voice was bitter, but there was no anger in it, only weariness. Elon paused, the sting of the man's words landing deeper than he expected. He had been one of those people in the past, hadn't he? The ones who gave a little, felt good about it for a moment, and then went back to their privileged lives. He wasn't sure how to respond. "I'm not like them," Elon finally said. "I'm trying to understand. I want to know what it's really like. How can I help? How can we change this?" The man stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he finally spoke. "You really want to know? Then listen. It's not about the money. It's not about giving us a few dollars or some food. It's about the system, man. The system that keeps us down, that keeps us invisible. You want to help? Then change that." Elon's heart pounded in his chest. The words hit harder than anything he had heard so far. The system. He knew the term, of course. He had heard it in countless discussions, read about it in reports, and even made a few speeches about it himself. But hearing it spoken with such raw intensity, from someone who had lived the reality, made the word feel different. The system was everything. It was the reason people like this man had been left behind. It was the reason that no matter how hard they fought, no matter how much they wanted to turn their lives around, they were shackled by forces beyond their control. The city had its rules, and these people didn't fit into them. It wasn't about willpower. It was about survival in a world that didn't care. Elon felt a knot in his stomach. What could someone like him, someone who had the power to change things, actually do to dismantle a system so entrenched, so vast? The thought of it was overwhelming, but he knew one thing. He couldn't keep going back to his life without confronting this. He couldn't ignore what he had seen. As if sensing his turmoil, John appeared at his side. "You're starting to get it, aren't you?" he asked quietly. Elon nodded, unable to find words. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the magnitude of the change that was dawning on him, but he knew that nothing could go back to normal after this. He had been living in a bubble, disconnected from the harsh truths that lay just outside his door. "Change doesn't happen overnight," John said, almost as if reading his thoughts. "But it starts with people like you seeing it for what it is. If you want to fix this, you have to start with understanding. And you've taken the first step." Elon didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of purpose. There was a lot to learn, a lot to face, and even more to change. But the journey he had started was about to take him places he had never imagined, and he had no intention of backing down now. The days following his visit to the safe space were a whirlwind of thoughts, realizations, and a growing sense of urgency. Elon had never been one to back away from a challenge, but this was different. This wasn't about building the next revolutionary technology or changing an industry. This was about changing a system that had been in place for centuries, a system that had created an invisible underclass of people who were forgotten the moment they fell through the cracks. But what could he do? Elon had always been a man of action, someone who took problems and found solutions. But this was bigger than one man. It was bigger than one company. It was bigger than even his vast network of connections and influence. He couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. Sitting in a small cafe one afternoon, with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, Elon found himself staring out the window. The city around him buzzed with life. People rushing by, cars honking, the hum of the daily grind. But in the back of his mind, he saw the faces of the homeless, the forgotten. He saw their lives in his mind's eye, like an image that wouldn't fade. John's words still echoed in his ears. It's not about money. It's not about charity. It's about the system. Elon had been blind to it all, focusing on the shiny future that technology promised, but ignoring the decay that was right in front of him. He had spent so much time reaching for the stars. Literally, he had forgotten to look at the ground beneath his feet. The sound of footsteps pulled him out of his thoughts. He looked up to see John entering the cafe, his expression serious as always. Without waiting for an invitation, he sat down across from Elon. "You look like you've been doing a lot of thinking," John said, leaning back in his chair. "I have," Elon replied, rubbing his temples, "but I'm not sure where to start." John studied him for a moment. "That's the thing, man. You can't fix it all at once. You're gonna need a plan. A real one. Not just throwing some money at a charity and calling it a day." Elon nodded, his mind racing. "I get that now, but it's overwhelming. The scope of it. I keep thinking about how big the problem is, and I don't even know where to begin." John's face softened for the first time. "I know it feels impossible, but that's why it's important to start small. Change doesn't always have to be massive. Sometimes it's the little things, the small cracks in the foundation, that let the light in." Elon let the words sink in. He had been thinking about the problem as if it was a massive, unsolvable issue, something that needed a billion-dollar idea or a tech breakthrough. But maybe John was right. Maybe it wasn't about big solutions. Maybe it was about identifying the small changes that could ripple out over time. The cracks that, once opened, would let the light shine through. "You're right," Elon said, a thought forming in his mind. "But we still need a way to get people's attention, to make them see what's happening." John smiled faintly. "You've got the right connections for that. Use what you've got. You're not a nobody anymore. You can reach the people who need to hear this. People in power, people with influence. You've already been through the first step, seeing the problem. Now it's about showing others what you've seen." Elon sat back, staring at the table. He had the connections, the resources, and the platform. But the real question was whether he had the courage to use them in a way that mattered. Would he risk his reputation, his career, his empire, for a cause so far removed from his comfort zone? "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," Elon admitted. "I've built my name on tech, on innovation. I've always been a problem solver. But it's not a problem you can fix with a gadget." "No, it's not," John agreed. "But you can be part of the solution. You've already started that by seeing it for what it is. Now it's time to decide if you're going to walk away from it, or if you're going to keep pushing. This city, this system, it's broken. And maybe, just maybe, you've got the power to help fix it." Elon sat in silence for a long time, the weight of John's words pressing down on him. This was no longer just a social experiment. This was no longer just a test of how well he could live as a homeless man. This was bigger. This was about real change, about shifting the paradigm, about giving the voiceless a chance to be heard. He knew John was right. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But if he could find a way to challenge the system, to break through the walls that had kept so many people trapped. Maybe, just maybe, he could change the world in a way that really mattered. What do we do next? Elon asked, his voice steady for the first time in days. John leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with determination. We get to work. We start by showing people the cracks. We show them that the system is broken, and then we give them the tools to fix it. And with that, Elon felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. The road ahead would be hard, and there would be obstacles at every turn. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. It wasn't about building rockets or electric cars. It was about changing lives. It was about giving people the chance to rise above the cracks in the system. Elon's mind raced as he left the cafe, stepping into the late afternoon sunlight. It felt as though the weight of the world had shifted onto his shoulders, but somehow he didn't mind. The pressure was a reminder of how far he'd come, and how far he still had to go. He walked down the street, thoughts swirling. The system is broken. John's words kept echoing in his head. Elon was beginning to see the cracks, but the question that remained was, how could he fix them? As he passed by a group of street vendors, one of them caught his attention. A middle-aged man with graying hair and weathered skin was selling newspapers on the corner, standing beneath the shadow of a towering office building. The man looked up, locking eyes with Elon. There was something in the way the man gazed at him, part curiosity, part recognition. "Hey, you look familiar," the man said with a hoarse chuckle. "You're not one of those billionaires pretending to be one of us, are you?" Elon paused, his mind still processing the weight of his conversation with John. He smiled, but it was a hollow gesture. "Something like that." The vendor raised an eyebrow. "You must be here to buy something, huh? Or maybe you just need to get your mind off things. Life gets tough sometimes." Elon hesitated, feeling the urge to speak, but the words didn't come easily. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a few bills, and handed them to the vendor. "I'll take a paper," he said simply. The vendor took the money, his hand lingering for a moment, as if uncertain whether to accept it. He gave a small nod and handed Elon a folded newspaper. Elon glanced at the headlines, but his mind wasn't on the words. He was thinking about how many people live their lives this way, on the edges, just trying to survive day by day, often overlooked or ignored by those who had the power to help. "I'll be back tomorrow," Elon said, his voice firm. The vendor didn't respond, but his eyes softened as Elon walked away, almost as if he understood the unspoken promise in the words. That night, in the comfort of his office, Elon sat at his desk, staring at the blank screen of his laptop. He had so many ideas swirling in his mind, plans, initiatives, ways to raise awareness, but there was something daunting about taking that first real step. He clicked open a new document. "What do we do next?" He typed. The cursor blinked at him, as if waiting for an answer. Elon didn't have all the solutions, but he knew one thing. To break the cycle, to change the system, it had to start somewhere. It had to start with people seeing things differently. And the only way to do that was to put the truth right in front of their faces. He began typing furiously, outlining a plan. A campaign of sorts, to use his platform, his influence, to raise awareness about homelessness and the invisible systems that kept people trapped in poverty. He didn't want to just talk about the issue. He wanted to show people how deep the problem really went. It wasn't enough to donate to charity or create a few feel-good moments. It had to be bigger than that. It had to be a movement. But how would he make people care? How could he convince those who had never lived a day without privilege to take a long, hard look at their society and see the cracks? Elon stared at the screen for a long time before something clicked. We need to bring people into this world, make them see it for themselves. He picked up his phone and dialed John. "I've got an idea. I need your help." A few minutes later, Elon was on a call with a team of trusted associates, laying the groundwork for what he was calling the Cracks in the Foundation campaign. The idea was simple: put people in situations where they could see, firsthand, what it was like to live on the streets, to experience the struggles of homelessness. The campaign would be immersive, raw, and real. No glossing over the reality of what people lived through. This wasn't just about making a point. It was about showing a reality that was often hidden in plain sight. People needed to understand that the system wasn't just broken. It was rigged against those without resources or power. As the night wore on, the campaign began to take shape. Elon worked with his team to plan outreach efforts, collaborations with charities and activists, and most importantly, a media blitz that would draw attention from all over the world. The goal was to build empathy, not guilt, understanding, not pity. But even as he put the pieces together, Elon knew the stakes were higher than he had ever anticipated. This campaign wasn't just about raising awareness. It was about changing the way people saw their world. It was about challenging the deep-rooted systems that perpetuated inequality, racism, and poverty. And that was no small feat. It was around 2 a.m. when Elon finally sat back, his fingers sore from typing, but his mind buzzing with the possibilities. He had started down a path that could change everything. This was the first real step. Tomorrow, they would start reaching out to local organizations, creating partnerships, setting up the logistics for the campaign. But there was still a lot of work to be done, and a lot of uncertainty ahead. The real question was whether the public, the people who had never experienced homelessness themselves, would be willing to confront the uncomfortable truth. Would they be willing to see what he had seen? Would they be willing to acknowledge the cracks in their own world? As the night faded into dawn, Elon stared out the window of his office, watching the first light of day break over the city. He felt a strange sense of peace, an understanding that he wasn't just launching a campaign. He was starting a revolution. Elon woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing incessantly. Groggily, he reached for it, his mind still swirling with the plans he'd laid out the night before. The campaign was officially underway, and the first task was to make sure everything was set up for the next phase, the public launch. The first thing he did was check the emails that had arrived overnight. His team had been working tirelessly to get the ball rolling, contacting various nonprofits, activists, and key players in the homelessness space. The response had been overwhelmingly positive, with many organizations excited to partner with him on the Cracks in the Foundation campaign. But there was a catch. While many were on board, some were hesitant. They wondered if Elon Musk, someone with his fortune and celebrity, could truly understand the struggles of homelessness. Could he relate to the plight of those who had been pushed to the fringes of society? Or was this just another stunt to boost his image? Elon couldn't blame them for questioning. It was a fair concern. After all, how could someone with a private jet and multi-billion-dollar companies truly know the depths of hardship faced by people living on the streets? But that was exactly why he was doing it. He needed to show that he was serious, that he was willing to get his hands dirty, to experience it for himself, and not just for the cameras. His own discomfort, his own vulnerability, was the key to making this campaign real. He quickly fired off a message to his team. Start assembling the logistics. Let's do this. Let's show them we're in it for the long haul. A few hours later, Elon stood in front of the camera, speaking directly into the lens for the first time about the campaign. He had decided that, from the outset, this wouldn't be a polished, corporate message. It needed to be raw, real, and unfiltered. If he was going to do this, he had to be transparent. No editing, no spin. The camera started rolling, and Elon took a deep breath, focusing on the words he had rehearsed. Hi, I'm Elon Musk, and I'm here to talk about something that's been on my mind for a long time now. The issue of homelessness is one that we've all seen but perhaps never truly confronted. It's easy to look away, to pretend it's not happening, to think it's someone else's problem. But it's not. It's everyone's problem. This campaign, Cracks in the Foundation, is about confronting the uncomfortable truths about our society. We're going to take people on a journey. We're going to put them in situations where they'll experience homelessness firsthand. We're going to see how the system works or doesn't work. And we're going to ask ourselves, what can we do to fix it? We're not just going to talk about the issue. We're going to live it. Together, we'll walk through the cracks that so many have fallen through. But we can't do this alone. We need all of you. So, join us in this conversation. Let's break the silence, and let's start making change. He ended the video with a simple, but powerful message. Together, we can fix this. The video was posted online, shared across social media, and sent to media outlets across the country. The response was immediate. Within hours, the campaign went viral. Some people were skeptical, calling it a publicity stunt. Others were more hopeful, praising Elon for taking a stand. But most importantly, people were talking about it. Conversations about homelessness that had been silenced for too long were suddenly being heard. John called him as soon as the video hit the airwaves. "I can't believe it," John said, his voice full of excitement. "It's everywhere. People are finally listening." Elon smiled, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "It's just the beginning." Over the next few days, the campaign gained even more traction. Videos, interviews, and articles about the cause flooded social media. Celebrities and influencers began sharing their own stories, pledging their support for the campaign. But it wasn't just about celebrity endorsements. It was the ordinary people, the ones who had been through the struggle themselves, who were starting to share their voices. And that's when the true power of the campaign became clear. People wanted to be heard. They wanted to share their experiences, their pain, their survival stories. They wanted the world to understand what they were going through. And for the first time, someone was listening. Elon's team began setting up real-world events, town halls, panel discussions, and collaborative efforts with organizations working directly on the ground. The goal wasn't to show up with answers, but to foster a space where real solutions could emerge. But even as the campaign gained momentum, Elon knew the hard part was yet to come. It was easy to gain attention, but the real test would be whether he could create tangible, lasting change. People could talk about homelessness all they wanted, but until systemic change took place, the issue would persist. Elon wasn't naive. He knew this was a long road ahead. But at least now, the conversation was happening. Elon didn't sleep much that night. The whirlwind of media attention surrounding the launch of the Cracks in the Foundation campaign was overwhelming. The next morning, as he sat in his office, staring at his phone screen, he could feel the intensity mounting. The campaign had gone viral, but with viral success came the inevitable wave of criticism. It was only a matter of time. Most of the feedback had been positive, but there were voices of dissent. As he scrolled through Twitter, he saw the accusations, the jabs, the mockery. "Elon Musk pretends to understand homelessness for clout," one tweet read. "Rich guy acting like he knows the struggle while living in a mansion," read another. The hashtag fake homeless Musk began trending. He clicked on a link to an article. A popular news outlet had published a piece questioning his motives. The headline read, "Is Elon Musk exploiting homelessness for publicity?" The writer argued that while the issue of homelessness was important, using it as a marketing tool or a social experiment was exploitative. Musk's campaign reeks of privilege, the article stated. What does he truly understand about the suffering of those he's trying to help? Elon felt a pit form in his stomach. The article hit home, cutting deep into his efforts. He had expected some resistance, but the intensity of the criticism was unsettling. He had never shied away from tough challenges, but this was different. This felt personal. His phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from John. "John, we need to talk. It's getting out of hand. The pushback is intense." Elon sighed, typing a quick reply. "Elon, I know. It's not what I expected, but I'm not backing down. John, we've got your back, but this is going to be harder than we thought. We need to make sure people see you're serious. Not just in words, but in action. Otherwise, this could backfire." Elon nodded to himself. John was right. Words alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to show people he wasn't just in this for the headlines. He needed to demonstrate that he was committed to real change. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and strategic planning sessions with his team. The pressure was mounting, but Elon couldn't afford to let up. He was determined to push through the pushback. That afternoon, he met with a small group of activists who had been critical of his approach. They sat across from him in a conference room, arms crossed, expressions skeptical. The room was thick with tension. "I appreciate you meeting with us, Elon," one of the activists, a woman named Maria, began. "But let's be clear, this isn't just a game. You can't fix homelessness by throwing money at it. You can't fix it by just looking at the surface. It's a system, and you're not going to change that by playing pretend." Elon took a deep breath. "I get it. I've heard the criticisms. But I'm not pretending. I want to understand this problem, and I want to use whatever resources I have to make a real difference." Maria shook her head. "It's not about the resources you have. It's about power. It's about dismantling the systems that perpetuate inequality. And that's not something you can do by pretending to be homeless for a week. Elon leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. I'm not pretending. I'm doing this because I want people to understand the system. If you can't see how deeply broken it is, then you can't fix it. I'm willing to do the work. The group remained silent for a moment. Then, slowly, Maria spoke again. Okay, show us you're serious. Go beyond the media campaign. Go beyond the viral moment. Get your hands dirty, Elon. Work with us. Get involved in the day-to-day struggles of those on the streets. You want to help? Then prove it. Elon nodded. I'm ready. What do you need from me? Maria looked around at her fellow activists, then turned back to Elon. We need your influence, your resources. We need you to amplify our voices. But more importantly, we need you to be a part of the solution. Really be a part of it. It was a challenge, but Elon was used to challenges. As the meeting ended, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that this was no longer about reputation or headlines. It was about making real, lasting change. And if the pushback meant he had to dig deeper, then that was exactly what he was going to do. Later that evening, Elon made a public statement. It was raw, honest, and unapologetic. I understand why people are skeptical. I get it. But I'm not here for publicity. I'm here because I believe we can do better. We can fix this. It won't be easy. It won't happen overnight. But I'm committed. And I need all of you to be committed too. He ended the statement with a call to action. Join me in this fight. It's time to stop pretending this problem doesn't exist. Let's face it, and let's fix it. As he hit send, Elon knew the real work was just beginning. The pushback had only fueled his determination. Now, it was time to prove he wasn't just another billionaire with a cause. He was in this for the long haul. Elon had been awake for nearly 48 hours, moving between meetings, planning sessions, and interviews. His body felt like it was running on fumes, but his mind was sharp. He couldn't afford to let up. Not now. Not when things were just starting to get real. He'd learned an important lesson from the pushback. People didn't just want words. They wanted action. They needed to see that he was willing to put in the work, not just drop money into a cause and walk away. He leaned back in his office chair, rubbing his temples. The first step to proving he was committed was about to begin. His first real immersion into the lives of the homeless. He had arranged to spend the next 48 hours in the streets, experiencing life as someone who had lost everything. He wasn't going to just stay in a homeless shelter for the night. He wanted the full experience. No comforts, no luxuries, and certainly no private security. He was going in raw. John had been skeptical, but after some convincing, he finally agreed to help coordinate the logistics. He'd arranged for Elon to meet with a group of homeless individuals who had agreed to share their stories and experiences. They would take him through the real challenges of living on the streets, from the lack of basic necessities to the constant fear of violence. It was going to be uncomfortable, but that was the point. Elon needed to feel every ounce of discomfort in order to fully understand what needed to change. Elon's first stop was a street corner in downtown Los Angeles. The city's bustling streets were teeming with people, but it was impossible to ignore the large number of individuals sitting on the sidewalk, wrapped in blankets or leaning against grimy walls. The harsh reality hit him harder than he expected. These weren't just statistics or faces on the news. These were real people, people whose lives had been shattered, people whose stories had been forgotten. He stepped out of the car and met his guide, a man named Chris, who had been living on the streets for over 5 years. Chris was in his late 30s, a wiry man with a sharp gaze and a weathered face. His clothes were old and tattered, his shoes falling apart at the seams. "Hey man, you ready for this?" Chris asked with a half-smile, clearly amused by the sight of Elon, dressed in an oversized hoodie and jeans. Elon nodded. "Let's do it." Chris led him through the streets, explaining how life worked for people like him. They passed by a row of makeshift tents, people hunched over fires trying to stay warm, and others who seemed to be in a state of perpetual motion, walking aimlessly, perhaps searching for a place to sleep, or simply trying to escape the cold. "The first thing you need to know," Chris said, "is that you never feel safe. There's always someone trying to take what little you have. People can be cruel, and no matter how hard you try, it feels like there's no way out. Elon absorbed every word, but the harshness of it all was overwhelming. He had read the statistics. He had seen the documentaries. But nothing had prepared him for the weight of the experience, the constant uncertainty, the raw vulnerability. After a few hours, Chris took him to a local encampment where a small community of homeless individuals had banded together for survival. There was a sense of camaraderie among them, but also an undercurrent of tension. It wasn't unusual for fights to break out over the smallest things. Resources were scarce, and trust was a rare commodity. Elon sat with a group of people around a fire. They were all talking about their lives, their struggles, and how they had ended up on the streets. One man, a former truck driver named Joe, explained how he had lost everything after a series of bad investments and health problems. "It's a slow burn," Joe said. "One minute, you've got a home, a job, a life. The next, you're living in a tent, hoping no one steals your stuff while you're asleep." Elon felt a pang in his chest. He knew there was a disconnect between the wealthy and the homeless, but he hadn't realized how deep it went. There was no safety net for these people. Once they fell, there was no way to catch them. Society had moved on without them. As the night fell, the group settled into their sleeping arrangements, some taking refuge in tents, others huddling under blankets. Elon found a small corner of the encampment to sleep, but the sounds of the city kept him awake. Sirens in the distance, the clatter of cars, the occasional shout from the street. It was all too much. There was no peace, no security, no certainty. He lay awake for hours, staring up at the stars. His mind raced. This was real. This was what it felt like. The helplessness, the isolation, the constant fear. The next morning, when he emerged from the makeshift shelter, Chris handed him a coffee from a nearby stand. "How's it feel, man?" he asked with a knowing look. Elon didn't answer immediately. His mind was still processing everything. But when he did speak, his voice was raw. "It's brutal. You can't even begin to understand it until you've lived it. I mean, I knew it was bad, but this is just the tip of the iceberg," Chris said. "Most people don't see what goes on behind closed doors. It's not just about being poor. It's about being invisible." Elon nodded, his mind already racing with plans and ideas. This experience, no matter how brief, had opened his eyes in ways he hadn't expected. He wasn't just doing this for the media anymore. He wasn't doing this to prove a point or to get attention. This was about real people, real lives that needed change. The first test had been painful, but it was only the beginning. Elon knew the road ahead would be filled with even more challenges, but he was ready for them. The real work, the true fight, was just getting started. Elon's encounter with life on the streets had left him with a sense of urgency he couldn't shake. The 48 hours he had spent living among the homeless had exposed him to a harsh reality he had never truly understood. The comfort of his wealth, the safety of his position, it all seemed trivial in comparison to the struggles he had witnessed. And yet, in the midst of that chaos, something else had struck him. The resilience of the people who lived on the margins. He couldn't just turn his back on them. He wasn't that person. But what could he do? He had already made his commitment, but now, after seeing it firsthand, the enormity of the problem felt overwhelming. As Elon sat at his desk in the office the morning after his experience, staring out the window, his mind buzzed with ideas. He had always believed in the power of technology and innovation to solve big problems. But this wasn't a problem that could be fixed with a new app or a breakthrough product. No, this required something deeper, something more personal. "Time to get to work," Elon muttered under his breath, pushing aside his doubts. The next step wasn't about another flashy announcement or social media post. It wasn't about grand gestures or flashy innovations. It was about making real, lasting change, and that meant involving the right people, people who had been fighting this battle long before he'd even thought to get involved. The following day, Elon took a flight to San Francisco. He wasn't alone. His team, along with a handful of experts on homelessness, came with him. They were heading to a community organization that had been working with homeless individuals for decades. This was where real work was being done, in the trenches, and Elon knew he had to learn from them. When they arrived, they were greeted by Sarah, the director of the organization. Sarah was in her 40s, with a no-nonsense attitude and a heart that seemed to care for everyone she met. Her work had earned her respect among the homeless community, but it had also made her a target of criticism from certain corners. She didn't have the luxury of time for fancy plans or promises. What she had were results, and that was enough. Elon Musk, Sarah greeted him, shaking his hand firmly. I hear you're looking to get involved, but this isn't a show up, take some photos, and then leave kind of thing. I'm here to work, Elon replied, his voice steady. I've learned that the hard way. She studied him for a moment, as though weighing his sincerity. Good. Because the people here don't have time for anything less than that. They need help, but they don't need someone just passing through. They need someone who's in it for the long haul. Elon nodded. I'm in. Whatever it takes. Over the next several days, Elon shadowed Sarah and her team as they worked with the homeless in the area. He visited shelters, soup kitchens, and community centers. He saw firsthand how the system failed people, how bureaucracy often got in the way of providing basic services. He witnessed the challenges of mental illness, addiction, and the stigma that kept people stuck in a cycle of poverty and homelessness. But amidst all the struggle, he also saw something else, something that surprised him. There were individuals who had found ways to help one another, even when the system had failed them. It was a network of informal support that, while small and often invisible, kept the community going. These were the unseen allies, the people who didn't have access to funding or powerful connections, but who made a difference every single day. Elon met one such person, an older woman named Carol, who had been homeless for almost a decade. She had lost her job after a medical emergency and had nowhere to turn. But instead of giving up, Carol had created a small network within the homeless community, providing food, clothing, and resources to those in need. She knew where to find shelter, where to get medical care, and most importantly, she knew how to make people feel human again. I can't fix the whole system, Elon, Carol said one day as they sat on a park bench, but I can help the people around me. That's all any of us can do. Sometimes that's enough. Her words stuck with him. Elon had come in thinking he could solve everything with technology, money, and influence. But the people he met, like Carol, had been doing the hard work for years. They were the true heroes, the ones who understood that change didn't come from the top down. It came from the bottom up, from people who had nothing but still gave everything. On his final day in San Francisco, Elon made a decision. He wasn't going to just throw money at the problem and hope it went away. He was going to focus on the unseen allies, the grassroots leaders who had been making a difference without recognition, without resources. He met with Sarah again. I want to do more than just donate, he said. I want to amplify the work you're already doing. I want to put the spotlight on the community leaders who are fighting this fight every day. They deserve more than our pity. They deserve our respect. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That's the first thing you've said that sounds like you're getting it. Elon smiled. It's not just about fixing the system. It's about building something better, together. That night, Elon made a public announcement. It was simple, but it was the most genuine thing he had said in weeks. I've learned a lot over the past few days, he said in the video. This isn't just about providing shelter. It's about providing dignity. And there are people on the ground already doing the work. I'm not here to be their savior. I'm here to amplify their voices and support them in every way I can. He pledged to fund grassroots organizations, to give them the resources they needed to expand their reach and increase their impact. But more than that, he promised to work alongside them, not as a celebrity, not as a billionaire, but as an ally. Elon Musk had always been a visionary, but this experience had humbled him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The homeless crisis in America was vast, complex, and deeply entrenched in the systems of society. No amount of money, no matter how vast his fortune, could magically fix the issues overnight. He had learned that the hard way. Yet, he had also come to realize something profoundly important. He wasn't alone in this. The grassroots leaders, the Carols and Sarahs of the world, had been fighting these battles long before his name ever became synonymous with space missions and electric cars. They had a clarity of purpose that Elon now admired. They had lived it. They knew the true impact of homelessness on people's lives, and that kind of experience couldn't be bought or replicated by any startup or venture. And so, Elon decided that the most significant role he could play wasn't to build the next tech-driven solution, but to become an advocate, a facilitator, who could bring attention and resources to the solutions already in place. The first part of his new plan was simple: create a platform where the stories of these unsung heroes could be heard. He didn't want to just talk about the homeless. He wanted to show the world what it was like to fight from the bottom up, to dig into the real-life experiences that weren't being shared on the news or social media. He began by reaching out to those he had met during his time on the streets. The individuals who were working tirelessly to provide food, shelter, and support to those in need. Carol, Sarah, Chris, these were the voices he wanted to amplify. But Elon didn't want to stop there. He wanted to connect these stories with the people who could make a real difference: business leaders, policymakers, and activists. A few weeks later, Elon hosted a summit in Los Angeles. It wasn't a conference for tech entrepreneurs or investors, but rather for the people who were already in the trenches: community organizers, social workers, mental health professionals, and even formerly homeless individuals who had managed to rebuild their lives. The event was an attempt to build bridges, to get people in the same room who could collaborate on innovative solutions. The summit was unconventional, to say the least. There were no fancy PowerPoint slides, no big-name keynote speakers. Instead, the focus was entirely on the stories, the lived experiences of those who had seen firsthand the failures of the system and had worked tirelessly to make a change in their communities. Elon didn't stand at the podium. Instead, he listened. He heard their stories, their ideas, and their frustrations. Sarah was one of the first to speak, sharing her thoughts on the root causes of homelessness and the systemic barriers that kept people trapped. "It's not just about providing beds and food," she said. "It's about making people feel like they have something to offer, like they can contribute. Homelessness isn't just a lack of shelter, it's a lack of dignity." Elon listened closely, absorbing everything she said. The system was broken, but it wasn't beyond repair. He had been thinking about the problem all wrong. It wasn't just about temporary solutions. It was about creating long-term change that could transform entire communities. Over the next few days, ideas started to flow freely. There were discussions on affordable housing, mental health services, job training programs, and the importance of community-based initiatives. Elon didn't have all the answers, but he knew that bringing these voices together was a start. By the end of the summit, Elon had made a decision. He would use his platform, his influence, and his resources to do one simple thing: elevate the conversation. He wasn't going to try to fix the problem from the top down. He was going to work alongside those who knew it best and help them get the attention and support they needed. That's when he proposed the next phase of his plan: a nationwide campaign to raise awareness about homelessness. It wouldn't just be about showing the public the harsh realities of living on the streets. It would focus on the power of community-led solutions, on the organizations and individuals who had been doing the work for years. Elon committed to providing funding, but more importantly, he offered his ability to mobilize resources from his network. Tesla and SpaceX employees, engineers, and researchers would volunteer their time and expertise to help develop new systems and technologies that could support homeless communities, from modular housing units to tech solutions that made it easier for people to find shelter or jobs. The first major initiative would focus on building affordable housing in areas with high homeless populations. Elon had already made strides in sustainable housing, and now he saw a clear opportunity to adapt that technology for the homeless. He envisioned small, modular homes that could be built quickly and affordably, designed to provide both shelter and a sense of ownership for those who lived in them. But he knew it wouldn't be enough to simply put up a few houses. He needed to work with local governments to ensure that those living in the homes would also have access to vital services: healthcare, job training, and mental health support. It had to be a holistic solution, one that not only provided shelter but also opportunities for rebuilding lives. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings and planning sessions. Elon's energy was contagious. His team worked tirelessly to get the ball rolling, reaching out to the experts, the organizers, and the policymakers who could help make this vision a reality. Elon knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks. There would be pushback. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right track. He wasn't just solving a problem for the sake of solving it. He was working with the people who understood the issue best: Together, they were going to build something lasting, something that would change the lives of thousands. And this time, Elon wasn't just an outsider with a big idea. He was part of something much bigger, a movement that had the potential to reshape the future of homelessness in America. Elon Musk's decision to elevate the conversation surrounding homelessness wasn't just a bold move. It was a turning point, both for him personally and for the millions of people affected by the crisis. His summit in Los Angeles had laid the groundwork, but now, the real work was beginning. Elon knew that raising awareness was only the first step. The true challenge lay in transforming that awareness into tangible, lasting change. The following weeks were a blur of activity. Elon met with politicians, local governments, and influential business leaders, all of whom were intrigued by his new direction. He wasn't just advocating for charity. He was pushing for policy changes, long-term strategies, and solutions that could truly make a difference. His deep pockets and high-profile status helped open doors that would otherwise be closed. But it wasn't just money he was offering. Elon was offering something even more valuable, his commitment and his time. Behind the scenes, the wheels were turning at full speed. Elon's team at Tesla, SpaceX, and the Boring Company mobilized to help with the initiative. Engineers and designers were brought in to help conceptualize affordable, sustainable housing options. His network of tech experts and social scientists began working together to develop tools that could aid in the transition from homelessness to self-sufficiency. One of the most promising ideas that emerged from the summit was the concept of modular housing. These small, mobile homes were designed to be assembled quickly and cost-effectively, making them perfect for addressing the immediate need for shelter. Elon's goal was to create a model that could be replicated nationwide, a prototype that could be built quickly in cities struggling with high homelessness rates. But there was more to the plan than just housing. Elon was determined to address the root causes of homelessness: mental illness, addiction, lack of education, and job opportunities. He met with experts in each of these areas, seeking advice and guidance on how to create a comprehensive solution. He knew that simply providing shelter wouldn't solve the problem if people didn't have the resources to rebuild their lives. As the weeks passed, Elon started seeing the vision take shape. Modular homes were in development, and plans for community integration were already underway. But there were challenges: legal red tape, zoning restrictions, and skepticism from some sectors of society. Some argued that Elon was just trying to make a spectacle of the issue, that his involvement would only serve to distract from real solutions. Others wondered if his high-tech approach was too ambitious, too disconnected from the realities of the people it was meant to help. Elon wasn't deterred. If anything, the pushback only fueled his determination. He had spent enough time on the streets to know that those who were homeless were more than just statistics. They were human beings, with dreams, hopes, and struggles. And they deserved more than just a roof over their heads. They deserved the opportunity to live with dignity. One day, as Elon was meeting with Sarah and Carol, they discussed the next step in the project: community involvement. The modular homes could only be the beginning. To create lasting change, there had to be an emphasis on rebuilding lives, not just providing shelter. Elon was struck by something Sarah said. "We need to get people involved in the process," she said. "When people are given the chance to contribute, to be a part of something bigger than themselves, they find purpose. They regain their dignity. It's about more than just a handout. It's about giving people the tools they need to succeed." Elon nodded thoughtfully. "So, you're saying that the homeless don't just need a place to stay. They need a place where they can thrive." "Exactly," Sarah replied. "That's how you break the cycle. That's how you change lives." And that's when the idea hit him. Elon started brainstorming with his team. What if the modular homes weren't just places to sleep? What if they could become centers for self-improvement, spaces where people could get access to mental health services, job training, and even educational programs? What if, instead of isolating the homeless, these homes could create micro-communities that fostered growth, collaboration, and support? It wasn't just about offering a safe place to stay. It was about offering a path forward. Over the next few months, Elon's plans started to take shape. The first pilot project was launched in a small city in California. The community there had been struggling with a large homeless population, and the local government was open to trying something new. Elon's team worked with local organizations, mental health professionals, and job training programs to create a comprehensive support system for the people moving into the modular homes. The results were slower than Elon had hoped. The road to change was not a straight path. There were setbacks. Some residents struggled to adjust to the new lifestyle. Others faced personal challenges that required more intensive intervention, and there were logistical hurdles to overcome. But despite the obstacles, the first group of residents in the modular homes began to thrive. They started attending job training, participating in therapy programs, and rebuilding relationships with their families. Some even started small businesses, selling handmade goods or offering services to their neighbors. For the first time in a long while, Elon saw hope where he had once only seen despair. However, the journey was far from over. As Elon walked through the community one afternoon, he noticed something that made him pause. A group of residents had gathered around, chatting and laughing together. It wasn't the homes themselves that had made the difference. It was the sense of community that had emerged. The residents, once isolated and disconnected, were now building something together. They were supporting one another, lifting each other up, and helping each other grow. This, Elon realized, was the real solution. It wasn't about creating a temporary fix. It was about creating a foundation for lasting change. A community built not just on shelter, but on connection, opportunity, and dignity. As the pilot project in California began to show promising signs of success, Elon Musk felt a sense of pride. The modular homes were becoming homes in the truest sense, not just shelters, but places of transformation. The residents were finding their footing, rebuilding their lives, and for the first time in a long time, they felt like they belonged to something. But not everyone shared Elon's optimism. Word of the project began to spread, and it didn't take long for critics to surface. As much as the idea had garnered support from local government officials and community organizers, there were those who believed Elon's approach was misguided. Skepticism came in many forms. Some saw it as a publicity stunt, others as an overcomplicated solution that couldn't address the systemic issues at play. "We've been down this road before," one local activist wrote in an op-ed. "These quick fixes may look good on paper, but they fail to tackle the underlying issues of poverty, mental health, and addiction." Elon Musk doesn't understand the real problems. He's out of touch. Elon read the article with a mixture of frustration and resignation. He understood the concerns. Many had heard promises of change before, only to see them fizzle out when faced with the overwhelming complexity of the issue. But that didn't mean he was wrong. The project wasn't just about throwing money at a problem. It was about creating a sustainable, community-driven solution. The modular homes were only one piece of the puzzle. But as much as he wanted to defend the project, Elon knew the only way to prove the critics wrong was through results. The residents of the pilot project had to succeed, and that meant he needed to ensure the long-term viability of the community. He couldn't just create a temporary solution. He needed to create a model that could be replicated in cities across the nation. To do that, Elon knew he would have to work through the resistance. There would always be critics, but he couldn't let them dictate the path forward. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. This was no longer just about homelessness. It was about challenging the status quo, about pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And that kind of disruption was never easy. Elon decided it was time to bring more people into the fold, people who believed in the vision, who could help him make the case for a different approach to homelessness. He reached out to his network, tapping into the powerful force of tech entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and social innovators. Together, they could amplify the message and take it to the next level. One of the first to respond was Yvonne, a Silicon Valley entrepreneur who had been working on sustainable housing solutions for years. She had seen firsthand how traditional methods of addressing homelessness had failed and was excited by the prospect of Elon's new approach. Yvonne had the resources and the credibility to help push the initiative forward, and she was ready to get to work. "We're not just trying to build homes," she said during a phone call with Elon. "We're trying to build a future where homelessness doesn't exist in the first place. We have to shift the narrative. It's not about charity. It's about creating opportunity, empowering people to take control of their lives again." Elon liked her enthusiasm. It was the kind of forward-thinking mindset that was needed to shift the conversation from a problem that needed fixing to a solution that could change lives. He was increasingly convinced that the way forward lay not in traditional methods of charity or government intervention, but in empowering communities to rebuild themselves from the ground up. With Elon's help, Elon's team began to organize a new national campaign, one that would highlight the successes of the California pilot project while addressing the deeper issues of systemic inequality. They reached out to media outlets, nonprofit organizations, and influential public figures who could speak to the broader implications of the initiative. The goal was to shift the focus from Elon Musk's involvement to the people who were truly driving the change: the residents, the community organizers, the social workers. At the same time, Elon doubled down on his efforts to expand the modular housing project. He didn't just want to build a few homes. He wanted to build entire communities. He began working with local governments to secure land for the expansion, pushing for zoning changes and cutting through the bureaucratic hurdles that had stalled other similar initiatives in the past. But progress didn't come without its obstacles. Opposition continued to grow, particularly from those who feared that the project would gentrify neighborhoods or drive up property prices. Some critics argued that by focusing on modular housing, Elon was inadvertently ignoring the more pressing issues of addiction and mental health care. Sarah, who had been working closely with Elon on the ground, wasn't surprised by the resistance. "Change is always hard," she said one evening over dinner. "People don't want to see things in a new light. They don't want to believe that something can work when it's never been done before." Elon looked out the window, lost in thought. "But we can't keep doing things the same way. If we want real change, we have to be willing to take risks. The old systems aren't working, and we have to do things differently." Sarah nodded. "Exactly. And the people who are making a difference, Carol, Chris, and the residents in the project, they're not waiting for permission. They're doing the work. We just need to give them the resources to do more." It was clear to Elon that the success of the project depended not just on the infrastructure of the modular homes, but on the people who would inhabit them. The community aspect was crucial. They needed to foster a culture of support, empowerment, and self-sufficiency. It wasn't just about providing shelter. It was about creating a space where people could rebuild their lives from within. As the weeks passed, Elon's resolve hardened. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. The criticism would continue, the resistance would grow, and the challenges would multiply. But he had come too far to turn back now. The stakes were too high, and the people who needed this change couldn't afford for him to give up. He was ready for the fight. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving that a different way was possible, and that by working together, they could rewrite the future of homelessness in America. Elon Musk's journey to revolutionize how society approached homelessness was taking shape, but as the initiative grew, so did the opposition. The resistance had started as a whisper, but soon it began to roar. Critics weren't just questioning Elon's motives anymore. They were attacking his methods, his resources, and even his integrity. Behind closed doors, powerful forces were aligning against him, and he was starting to feel the weight of their influence. Elon sat in his office, staring at his laptop screen, where the latest news article had just dropped. The headline was inflammatory: "Musk's Homeless Project, a PR stunt disguised as a solution." The piece, published by a major media outlet, was a scathing critique of his approach. It suggested that his efforts were more about image building than about actual change. The article cited anonymous sources within local government and nonprofit sectors who felt that Musk's involvement was an attempt to distract from the real issues, and that his projects would only serve to gentrify and displace. The comments section was filled with doubt, skepticism, and cynicism. Elon wasn't surprised by the attack. In his line of work, criticism was a given. But what worried him was the coordinated nature of it. It wasn't just the media, but also several key figures within the nonprofit sector, city councils, and even corporate stakeholders who were suddenly backing away from his project. These were the very same people who had previously been eager to support it. Sarah had warned him that this might happen. "Whenever you try to disrupt the system fights back," she'd said during their last meeting. "The powers that be will always want to maintain control." Elon's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. It was clear now. His project, while promising, was stepping on a lot of toes. Local politicians who had relied on campaign donations from real estate developers didn't want to risk angering those who stood to lose if Elon's modular homes became a success. Some nonprofits feared that his success would eclipse their own, undermining their decades of work in traditional housing programs. And the media, often swayed by corporate interests, was all too eager to perpetuate the narrative that Elon's initiative was simply a tech billionaire's vanity project. But none of this would stop him. Elon had faced far worse opposition in his career. There was no shortage of critics who once doubted his ventures with Tesla or SpaceX. He had always been a disruptor, and disruption was never easy. But if he had learned anything from those battles, it was that staying true to a vision, despite the resistance, was the only path forward. He stood up from his desk and walked over to the window, looking out at the skyline. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the city. Despite the shadows that loomed over his project, Elon could see the light at the end of the tunnel. This was a fight worth fighting, and he wasn't about to back down. He needed to take action, but not just in the traditional sense. He needed to shine a light on the unseen forces that were working against him. He needed to call attention to the vested interests that were trying to squash progress for their own gain. And most importantly, he needed to rally his supporters and prove that his initiative was about something much bigger than his reputation. It was about creating a new future for people who had long been forgotten. The first step, Elon decided, was to go on the offensive. He would host a live-streamed event that would give him a direct platform to speak to the public. It would be an open discussion about homelessness, about the root causes, the systems that perpetuated it, and the real solutions that could make a difference. He wasn't just going to defend his project. He was going to challenge the narrative that had been built around it. He would expose the political and economic interests that had worked behind the scenes to prevent real change from happening. The team rallied quickly. Sarah, Yvonne, and a few key allies from the nonprofit world helped Elon put together a panel of experts, mental health professionals, housing advocates, economists, and even former homeless individuals who had successfully transitioned out of poverty. The idea was to humanize the issue and show that the real solution wasn't about throwing money at the problem but about dismantling the systems that kept people trapped in cycles of poverty and despair. The event, dubbed A New Vision for Homelessness, was scheduled for the following week. Elon knew it would be a turning point. Either the public would rally behind him, or the weight of the opposition would crush the momentum he had worked so hard to build. But if there was one thing Elon was certain of, it was this. He wasn't going to let fear or resistance stop him from doing what he believed was right. The night before the event, as he sat in his office reviewing his notes, Sarah called. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice warm but tinged with concern. "I'm ready," Elon replied, though he knew his confidence was as much for Sarah's benefit as it was for himself. "Tomorrow we make our case. We tell the world what this project is really about. No more hiding behind headlines and false narratives." Sarah paused for a moment before speaking. "Just remember, Elon, there are always going to be people who resist change. They'll question your motives, your methods, and your success. But you're doing something important. And at the end of the day, that's what matters." Elon nodded, appreciating her words. "I'm doing this because people need help, and I believe we can make a difference. Tomorrow is just the beginning." The event was a success beyond what Elon had hoped for. Hundreds of thousands tuned in to the live stream, and the panel discussion was insightful and impactful. Elon spoke passionately about the need to rethink how society viewed homelessness, while the experts laid out concrete solutions, backed by data and real-world experience. As the broadcast ended, Elon felt a sense of relief, but also a new determination. The fight was far from over, but he had made his point. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about his wealth or his fame. It was about a broken system that needed to change. And with that change, he believed the future could be better for everyone, no matter their circumstances. The broadcast had made waves, far more than Elon had anticipated. In the days that followed the live stream, the public conversation around his homelessness initiative shifted dramatically. What had once been a controversial project led by a billionaire tech mogul was now being discussed as a potential blueprint for real change. The narrative was slowly changing. People were starting to see it for what it was. Not just an experiment in housing, but a bold, forward-thinking approach to one of America's most persistent problems. For Elon, It was a moment of validation, but he knew that public opinion was just the beginning. What really mattered now was the action that would follow. The system of entrenched interests, the corporate donors, the local governments, and the institutionalized nonprofits hadn't just rolled over. They were still pushing back in every way they could. At his Tesla headquarters, Elon sat with Sarah, Yvonne, and a few members of his team. They were brainstorming their next steps, figuring out how to capitalize on the momentum from the live stream. Okay, so we've got the media on our side for now, Elon began, flipping through a series of notes. But I'm not naive enough to think that the opposition is going to just let us roll out these modular communities without a fight. Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious. We need to make sure we're not just getting attention, but that we're building a network of partners, local leaders, activists, social enterprises, who will stand with us when the real resistance hits. Yvonne nodded. We've already seen some local governments begin to backtrack. Some have even been quietly contacting us, asking how they can implement the project in their cities. But we need more than just good press. We need political and grassroots support. Elon knew they were right. Without a solid base of allies, the project could fall apart before it had a chance to scale. So, they began reaching out to more partners, mayors, city councils, housing advocates, and even conservative leaders who might be persuaded to see the value in the initiative. The idea wasn't just to win over the left-wing activists, but to make the project bipartisan in its appeal. If they could get people from all sides of the political spectrum on board, it would be harder for the opposition to tear the project down. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and strategy sessions. Elon was more focused than ever, making sure every angle was covered. They would need support from every corner of the country if they hoped to expand beyond California. Meanwhile, as the media buzz grew, so did the scrutiny. Some reporters were eager to cover the initiative from an optimistic perspective, but others were digging deeper, looking for cracks in the project's foundation. And sure enough, they found them. An investigative reporter uncovered a series of budget overruns in the early stages of the pilot project. Though the numbers were relatively small in the grand scheme of things, the headlines were sensational. Musk's homeless housing project facing cost overruns, and billionaires' initiative struggles with budget transparency. Elon wasn't surprised by the turn of events. He'd known from the start that any large-scale project, particularly one driven by a visionary like him, would be scrutinized. But the timing of this revelation couldn't have been worse. They were in the middle of securing funding for expansion, and the negative press could derail the momentum. He spent the next day responding to questions, calmly explaining that the budget issues were a result of the experimental nature of the project and that they were working to fix them. The truth was, they had underestimated some of the logistical costs in the beginning, but they were learning as they went. Elon knew that in the long term, the model would stabilize, but it was a difficult pill to swallow in the short term. "I've been here before," he said to Sarah later that evening. "Tesla had issues with cost overruns in the beginning. SpaceX too. The press loves to paint these things as failures, but that's just part of building something new." Sarah sighed, her hand on her chin. "It's frustrating. We're doing everything we can to help, but it's like no one wants to see the success. They only want to focus on the setbacks." Elon nodded. "That's how it goes. But it doesn't matter. We'll keep pushing forward. We're not going to let a couple of bad headlines stop us." As the weeks went by, the story of Elon's project continued to unfold in unexpected ways. New alliances were formed, and as more local governments began to express interest, the ripple effect of the pilot project started to spread. One of the most surprising developments came when a major philanthropic organization, one that had traditionally focused on issues like education and healthcare, approached Elon with an offer to fund part of the next phase of the project. The group's board had seen the potential in Elon's approach, and they were willing to invest in a long-term solution, provided that the modular homes could be integrated with mental health and job training programs. "This is huge," Sarah said as she read through the terms of the proposal. "We're not just building homes. We're building a comprehensive system that can help people re-enter society, heal, and thrive." Elon smiled, feeling a sense of relief. "This is the kind of support we need. It's proof that people are starting to see the value of what we're doing." But even as the project gained steam, Elon remained focused on the bigger picture. The real test, he knew, would come when it was time to scale. The modular homes, while a start, were just one piece of a larger puzzle. He was determined to ensure that the initiative would provide not just shelter, but long-term solutions to homelessness, solutions that addressed the root causes of the problem. In the coming months, Elon and his team would continue to fight for the project's success, navigating the complexities of government, politics, and public opinion. But with each victory, no matter how small, the ripple effect grew stronger, and the vision of a future where homelessness was no longer a national crisis became a little more tangible. Despite the growing support and positive developments, Elon Musk knew that the road ahead would not be free of obstacles. As the attention around his homelessness initiative continued to expand, the pushback from more entrenched forces grew louder and more aggressive. It was no longer just about criticizing his approach. It was about trying to dismantle it entirely. One morning, as Elon was preparing for a meeting with investors, his phone buzzed with an urgent notification. The headline read, "Musk's homeless housing model faces major setback. Court blocks new initiative due to zoning laws." The article detailed how a recent legal challenge had halted the expansion of his modular housing project in 2 major cities due to local zoning regulations. It was a blow, not just to the timeline of the project, but to the narrative he had worked so hard to shape. Zoning issues, Elon muttered under his breath. Of course. He wasn't surprised that the legal system had become another battleground. Local governments were beginning to see his project as a threat, one that could disrupt established housing policies and, more importantly, threaten the interests of powerful real estate developers. The real estate lobby had deep connections in local politics, and Elon knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. He turned to Sarah, who had just entered the room. "What's the plan?" he asked, trying to hide the frustration in his voice. "We're filing an appeal," Sarah replied, her expression calm but resolute. "We've got a solid legal team, and we can argue that this zoning issue is outdated and not applicable to innovative housing models. But it's going to take time, and in the meantime, we can't afford to lose momentum." Elon knew this was a critical juncture. The court's decision had set a dangerous precedent, and the ripple effect from this legal battle could set the entire project back months, if not years. The press, of course, had already seized upon the story, painting it as a massive failure and questioning the viability of the initiative. The damage was being done, and it was starting to feel like a full-scale assault. But Elon wasn't the type to back down. He had dealt with the court system before. Whether it was Tesla's early struggles with the California Air Resources Board or SpaceX's numerous regulatory hurdles, Elon had learned that nothing in the tech world, especially when it involved disrupting established industries, was going to come without a fight. "Let's get to work," Elon said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. "We're not going to let this be the end. We'll find another way." As the team scrambled to respond to the legal challenge, Elon decided to take a different approach, one that would take the battle directly to the people. If the legal system was going to be slow to catch up with his vision, he would work on shifting public perception in a way that would put pressure on local governments to act. Elon called for a press conference, inviting reporters, activists, and even local politicians who had supported the initiative to speak. The goal wasn't just to address the legal issue, but to reframe the conversation around the project's long-term impact. This wasn't about building homes. It was about transforming the way society approached homelessness, mental health, and economic mobility. The press conference was scheduled for the following week. Elon spent the next several days preparing, making sure he had the right talking points and statistics to emphasize the project's success in providing stable housing for vulnerable populations. He knew the key would be showing that the benefits of the initiative far outweighed the legal and logistical hurdles. The day of the press conference arrived, and Elon stood in front of a packed room of reporters, cameras flashing as he took the podium. "We all know that homelessness is a crisis in America," he began, his voice calm and steady. "And the current system, as it stands, is failing those who need help the most. My project is not about a quick fix. It's about creating a new paradigm, a sustainable, scalable model that prioritizes dignity, health, and opportunity." Elon went on to outline the success of the pilot project, highlighting how it had helped individuals transition off the streets and into stable living situations. He spoke about the mental health services, job training programs, and community building that were an integral part of the model. The numbers spoke for themselves. Recidivism rates for homelessness had decreased, and participants were finding long-term employment at higher rates than traditional housing programs. But despite the success, Elon continued, there are forces that want to keep the system exactly as it is. There are those who are comfortable with the status quo, those who profit from maintaining a broken system, and they will do everything they can to stop us. The room grew tense as Elon's words sank in. He wasn't just talking about zoning laws or legal challenges. He was talking about a system of entrenched interests that made billions off of keeping people in poverty, and he wasn't afraid to name it. Homelessness is not just about a lack of shelter, Elon said. It's about a lack of opportunity, and we will fight for a future where everyone has access to the opportunity they deserve. This fight is about all of us. The press conference ended with a standing ovation from the activists in the room, but Elon knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. The battle in the courts and on the streets was just beginning. Powerful lobbies and political insiders would continue to fight tooth and nail to preserve the status quo. But Elon had something they didn't: determination, innovation, and the will to see it through. Later that day, as he sat in his office, Sarah walked in with some good news. The appeal process had moved forward faster than expected. They had gained support from key allies in the legal world, and there was a real chance the zoning issue could be overturned. It's not over yet, Sarah said, her eyes gleaming with cautious optimism. We're on track to make this work. Elon smiled. This is just the beginning. We're going to win this. It had been weeks since the press conference, and while the public support for the initiative had only grown, the real challenge was behind the scenes. Legal battles, media scrutiny, and constant pushback from established powers had tested Elon's resolve, but there was an undeniable sense of forward momentum now. As the legal team worked diligently on the zoning issues, Elon began to focus on his next big goal: securing the long-term funding that would allow the project to expand rapidly across the country. Despite the setbacks, Elon could feel something shifting in the air. The conversations were no longer focused solely on the technical aspects of the modular homes or the budgeting struggles. They were talking about the impact on real people, on lives being transformed, on communities rising from the ashes of a broken system. Elon knew that if he could harness this wave of change, there was nothing stopping him. But not everything was moving in the right direction. His inbox was filled with emails from investors, some cautious, some outright dismissive. They had heard the reports about zoning laws, and the news about cost overruns still lingered in the media. They wanted proof, concrete evidence that the project could succeed on a larger scale. Elon wasn't the type to let doubt creep in, but he knew that without a solid plan to show them, the funding could slip away. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Elon had been meeting with a handful of his closest advisors when his phone buzzed with a message from Yvonne. It was short, direct, and to the point. Major philanthropist group wants to talk. They're interested in funding the entire next phase of the project. Elon's pulse quickened. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. A lifeline to bring the project to the next level. The philanthropist group was one of the largest in the country, focused on supporting innovative, systemic change. If they were truly interested, this could provide the financial stability and credibility the project desperately needed. Elon immediately called Yvonne. Set up the meeting. Let's get this moving. The meeting took place a week later at a sleek, modern conference room in a high-rise building in downtown San Francisco. The philanthropic group, led by an influential woman named Alice Richardson, had a reputation for being cautious but highly effective. They didn't fund just any project. They backed only those with proven potential for large-scale social impact. Elon knew this could be a game-changer, but he also understood that Alice and her team wouldn't be easily swayed. As Elon entered the room, he was greeted by Alice and several of her top advisors. The room was dimly lit, with a large table at the center where the team gathered. Alice, a woman in her mid-50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, offered Elon a firm handshake. "We've been following your project closely," Alice began, sitting down across from him. "And I have to admit, we're impressed by the potential, but we're also cautious. There are a lot of moving pieces here, and we need to know that your team can handle the scale you're envisioning." Elon nodded, his gaze steady. He knew this was going to be a tough conversation, but he was prepared. "We've proven that the concept works. The pilot projects in LA and San Francisco are already showing results. The modular homes are providing a stable foundation, and the support programs for mental health, job training, and social reintegration are making a difference. Alice listened carefully, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. We've seen the numbers. What we need to know is whether you can navigate the bureaucratic and political hurdles that will inevitably arise when you scale. How are you planning to handle that? Elon leaned forward. The project isn't just about building homes, it's about changing systems. Yes, there will be opposition, and yes, there will be challenges with zoning, with local politics, with entrenched interests. But we're building partnerships at every level: local governments, activists, businesses, and even the communities we're helping. We have a support base now that we didn't have a year ago. People are starting to see that this is not just a stopgap solution. It's a long-term fix. Alice was silent for a moment, processing his words. Then she asked, "What do you need from us? Why should we be the ones to fund this next phase?" Elon took a breath, knowing that this was the key moment. What we need is not just financial backing. We need your influence, your credibility. You have access to the decision-makers, the influencers, the organizations that can help us break down the barriers. With your support, we can expand to other cities, push through the regulatory obstacles, and truly make a national impact. Alice's eyes narrowed as she considered his proposal. It was clear she wasn't making a decision lightly. You realize this is a huge commitment. You'll be changing the landscape of homelessness, and there will be blowback. But I can see your conviction. You've done the hard work. Now, you need the muscle. Elon nodded. Exactly. After a long pause, Alice finally spoke. We'll fund it, but we'll need to set some parameters. We'll want to see quarterly reports on the progress, and we'll need a clear timeline. If you can keep up your end of the deal, we'll help get you the visibility and support you need to scale this project. Elon felt a surge of relief. This was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. Thank you. You won't regret this. The meeting ended on a positive note, and as Elon walked out of the building, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The funding from the philanthropist group wasn't just about money. It was a signal that the tide was turning. The momentum was shifting. Now, with the backing he needed, Elon was ready to push harder than ever. With this new support, the initiative would have the resources to expand. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but Elon was more determined than ever to see it through. The system had been designed to maintain the status quo, to keep people in cycles of poverty and homelessness. But Elon had always believed that change was possible. And now, with the right backing, he could prove it. With the funding secured, Elon's project gained the momentum it needed to break through the toughest barriers. The backing from Alice Richardson and her philanthropic group was more than just a financial windfall. It was a symbol of validation, a clear signal that the initiative had the potential to reshape not just homelessness, but how society viewed those on the margins. Elon and his team immediately got to work, scaling the project to new cities. Modular housing units were popping up in locations across the country. The media buzz had reached a fever pitch, with talk of the project being dubbed the future of homelessness. But with success came even greater scrutiny. The opposition, once limited to a few local politicians and real estate moguls, had now grown louder and more coordinated. The real estate industry was particularly vocal, decrying Elon's housing model as a threat to their business. Major city councils began to feel the pressure. News outlets published stories warning of the dangers of unregulated housing, while pundits and analysts criticized the scale of the project, claiming it was unsustainable and bound to fail. But Elon knew that this was the moment to double down. If the project could survive this intense scrutiny, if it could thrive despite the attacks from the old guard, it would prove that it wasn't just an idea, it was a revolution. The next big hurdle came in the form of an opposition rally, set to take place in one of the cities where the modular homes had just been installed. Elon knew that this was a critical turning point. The rally was being organized by a coalition of influential figures, developers, local business owners, and even politicians. They were calling for an immediate halt to the project, citing concerns about its impact on local economies and property values. In response, Elon decided to take matters into his own hands. It wasn't enough to let the project speak for itself. He had to make a statement. He would attend the rally, not as a bystander, but as the face of the movement, an undeniable symbol of the change they were fighting for. The day of the rally arrived, and tensions were high. Protesters gathered, waving signs and chanting slogans against the initiative. News crews lined the streets, eager to capture every moment of the conflict. Elon, however, was determined to show that his vision wasn't about creating division. It was about bringing people together. With his team beside him, Elon stepped onto the stage at the rally, surprising both his supporters and detractors. He walked up to the microphone, his gaze scanning the crowd. For a moment, there was a stillness, an unspoken recognition that this was no ordinary moment. "I know many of you don't agree with what we're trying to do here," Elon began, his voice clear and steady. "You think that what we're doing threatens the established system. But the truth is, the system we have today isn't working. It's broken. And the people it's failing are the ones who suffer the most." The crowd shifted uneasily, unsure of what to expect. Elon continued, his tone measured but firm. "This isn't about taking anything away from you. It's about giving people the dignity they deserve, the chance to rebuild their lives. And that benefits all of us. A society is judged by how it treats its most vulnerable." There was a mix of applause and boos, but Elon stood his ground. He had spent his life confronting the impossible, and this was no different. He wasn't just fighting for homes. He was fighting for a new way of thinking, one that prioritized people over profit. As he finished his speech, Elon turned and walked off the stage, not waiting for a response. His message had been delivered. The rally was chaotic, but it marked a turning point. The next day, local officials began to reconsider their stance, some even publicly voicing support for the initiative. The tide was turning. Within weeks, Elon's project began to gain momentum faster than ever. Local governments, initially hesitant, started to work with his team, clearing regulatory hurdles and offering tax incentives for new housing projects. Activists rallied around the initiative, pushing for more cities to adopt the model. The media, once skeptical, began to highlight the successes of the housing units, showing how they were reducing homelessness in real time. Then, just as things were starting to feel unstoppable, came the final challenge, the Supreme Court. A major case involving the zoning laws that had previously blocked Elon's initiative had made its way to the highest court in the land. If the court ruled against the project, it could cripple the entire movement, setting back years of progress. The stakes had never been higher. The courtroom was packed with journalists, lawyers, activists, and government officials. Elon sat at the front, his face stoic as he awaited the ruling. The tension in the air was palpable. For weeks, the media had speculated on how the court might rule, with many experts predicting a loss for the initiative. Finally, the judge called for order, and the courtroom fell silent. The judge read the decision slowly, his voice echoing in the still room. "After careful consideration, the court has ruled in favor of the defendant," the judge announced. "The zoning laws, as applied to this case, are outdated and do not reflect the innovative nature of the housing project. The initiative will move forward." The room erupted into applause. Elon sat frozen for a moment, disbelief washing over him. The final hurdle had been cleared. As he left the courthouse, surrounded by supporters, he couldn't help but reflect on the long journey it had taken to reach this moment. It had been filled with challenges, opposition, and setbacks. But it had also been a testament to the power of determination, of believing in something even when the odds were stacked against you. Elon's project was no longer just an idea, it was a movement. A movement that would continue to grow, to change lives, and to show that when people came together for a common cause, anything was possible. The sun was setting over a city that had been forever changed. As Elon stood in front of one of the new modular housing communities, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at how far they had come. The streets, once filled with tents and homeless encampments, now bustled with families, young professionals, and retirees. People were beginning new chapters of their lives in the very homes that had once seemed impossible. The initial skepticism had given way to success. The housing units were now spreading beyond California, with plans underway for major expansion in cities across the nation. Public perception had shifted as well. What had once been viewed as a radical idea was now a proven model. The media, which had once criticized the project for its boldness, now hailed it as a revolutionary step forward. And even some of the staunchest critics had begun to acknowledge its impact. But as much as the project had grown, Elon knew that it wasn't just about the homes. It was about the lives that had been changed. He walked through the community center, where a group of volunteers were helping new residents settle in. There was no glamour in the work being done, just a quiet dedication to improving lives. As he passed by, he was greeted by a mother who had moved in with her children just a few months ago. She beamed at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Elon, I just wanted to say thank you. You've given us a chance," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd see the day when we'd have a place to call home again." Elon smiled, humbled by the moment. "It's not just me," he replied. "It's all of us working together." Later that evening, Elon sat down for an interview that would air live across the country. The host, who had once doubted his project, now spoke with admiration. "You've changed the landscape of homelessness in this country. What's next for you?" Elon leaned forward, his expression serious yet hopeful. "This is just the beginning. We've proven that innovation can solve real-world problems, but there are many more challenges ahead. Homelessness is just one issue. There are many other systemic problems that need addressing: education, healthcare, the environment. My goal is to use the lessons we've learned here to tackle them, one by one. But it all comes back to this. When you have the will to create change, anything is possible." The host nodded, clearly moved. "What would you say to people who still doubt the project?" Elon paused, his gaze steady. "I would say that change is never easy. It's always met with resistance. But that doesn't mean it's not worth fighting for. The future is shaped by those who refuse to accept the way things are and instead work to make them better. It's not always about making the right decision. It's about making the bold decision." Back at his office, Elon received a message from Yvonne, who had been with him since the earliest days of the project. It was a picture of one of the first families to move into the housing units: 2 parents, a young child, and their dog. They were standing in front of their new home, smiling with pride. Yvonne's message was simple: "This is why we do it." Elon stared at the image for a long time, the weight of the moment sinking in. The struggle had been long and difficult, filled with uncertainty and opposition. But it had been worth it. For every person who had found a new home, for every family that had been given the chance to rebuild their lives, the project had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. The legacy of the project wasn't just in the homes that had been built, but in the lives that had been transformed. It was a testament to what could be accomplished when people, driven by a shared sense of purpose, refused to accept the status quo. As the evening drew to a close, Elon stepped outside, looking up at the stars. He could already see the next challenge on the horizon, the next frontier to conquer. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace, knowing that he had made a difference. The journey wasn't over, but the impact of his work had already begun to ripple out, changing lives in ways he couldn't have imagined when he first started. And that, he thought, was the true measure of success.